Thank you, Chair, and excuse me, the rest of the board for having me here today. One quick correction to something you said, Board Chair Reddy, is that we do not need approval from the advisory committee of voting approval in order to complete the count. We are a delegated authority as the COC collaborative applicant, and our COC charter gives that authority to us. Of course, we are working in deep partnership with our advisory committee and making sure that they, as the board that oversees the COC part of our funding, is kept in deeply informed as we develop this and move forward. We have, however, gotten the approval from HUD for this, and so we are good to go there and moving forward with it, but just wanted to make that clear. And with that, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, that is not sharing the right one. Hold one moment. Someday I'll be able to, use computers appropriately. Okay, I think we are set now. You're seeing a deck that says 2024 Unsheltered PIT. Right. Okay.
Yes.
Right, now I think I have you in the right spot. Apologies for that. Here to talk about the 2024 Unsheltered PIT today with you all. I have quite a bit to go through, and there will be opportunities for a little bit of pick your own adventure today. But before we get into that, I'm going to be really clear that as an agency, we maintain centering this number. 53,532 people experienced homelessness in King County in 2022. While the PIT is an extremely important exercise that we do for an individual snapshot, when we're looking at what we are holding ourselves accountable to as an agency when it comes to ending homelessness, this remains our North Star. So it's always important for us to lead with that, and we'll continuously lead with that, because while this is the largest number we put out, it is also the most accurate number that we know of in terms of the total population of people experiencing homelessness. And I will continue, and we as an agency will continue to center that. Agenda for today. Going to go through a little bit of background on the PIT, some stuff that's happened before, provide an overview of what our plan is for 2024, get into some detail of respondent-driven sampling. This is the part where it's choose your own adventure a little bit. I can get as nerdy and in the weeds with math as folks want, or stay high level. Talk about some of the lessons we learned in 2022 when we first used respondent-driven sampling, provide a high-level timeline. We'll go through some of the information about hubs we're currently considering, and then go to next steps. Okay, background. So I believe you all know that the point-in-time count is a requirement from both HUD and from Washington State Commerce. The point-in-time counter PIT aligns with the housing inventory counter HIC to be completed at the same time. And today we're largely going to be, or from here on out, actually, we'll be talking about the unsheltered PIT, which is actually only required every other year. The standard method for that is a street count, but that street count and some other methods are widely understood to be an undercount. I want to recognize that people have been doing the point-in-time count locally long before the KCRHA. Those efforts were actually efforts that helped lead the nation towards understanding how we might come together as a community to better understand the problem of homelessness and talk about it on the large scale that it is. So we're building on work that others have done before. But when we became the system administrators in 2022, the responsibility of completing the PIT came to us. In that year, we also received approval from HUD to use a different methodology for our unsheltered PIT than the traditional one that's been completed here before, which is respondent-driven sampling. In 2022, we were only able to accomplish this in partnership with the Lived Experience Coalition, other folks with lived experience, and researchers from the University of Washington. The street count, which is again the traditional one that's been employed here and is traditionally what's used at other COCs across the country, is an observational count at a night, on a single night. Many of you I know on this call and many in the audience have actually participated in this count in the past, many of you for many years, in fact. This count often gets talked about as a census, but I want to be really clear that it is not a true census. This is a count of people who are visibly unsheltered, not a comprehensive census where there are actually checks and balances in place to ensure that you talk to and engage with every single person who is in a population. And then that visible count is paired with a survey that is deployed after the count in order to get demographic information and other information that's reported to HUD. There's some issues with this, which is what led us to look at a different method, which is that it requires a huge number of volunteers. I think folks talked about previously, and some of the folks calling in talked about staffing for something like this. It requires hundreds of people mobilized and volunteering on the same night. It requires a person that we are including in the count to be visible when we are walking the streets or driving the streets. It separates the survey from the population that we're actually sampling. So that while I do trust the statistics that go into pairing those two things together, when possible, actually having the survey and the sample occur for the same folks is best practice. It uses blanket estimators for tents and vehicles. Of course, when we're going around and doing the street count, we're not going to knock on tents or vehicles to see how many people are in there sleeping at night. And so we use a blanket estimator for all tents and all vehicles, treating them the same. It also doesn't work very well in rural areas, not just because those are areas that are very hard to get through in a slow, methodical way, but many of our rural areas in King County are heavily wooded, where people in those areas tend to sleep if they're sleeping outside. And then again, there's nobody who thinks that this is a fully accurate count. Everybody across the board agrees that this is an undercount. So respondent-driven sampling, which I will again go into much greater detail later, is a sampling method. It's important to note that sampling methods, we are looking at intentionally a small amount of a population in order to create an estimation of overall population. RDS does that same thing. So I want to be clear from the beginning that it is not a requirement for this type of sampling to work, that we are in every part of King County, covering all the streets. What we are looking to do in this is to identify key places where we can get some representative samples. Why did we choose this method? It requires fewer locations and fewer volunteers or staff in order to actually operate them. It allows peer recruitment, so engaging hard to reach populations becomes easier. It also allows for folks to choose how they are incorporated into this count. We can directly survey the sample, which I mentioned previously. And then the estimations here, instead of being blanket estimators, are based off of peer connections and participant information. This is also a method that works well in urban, suburban, and rural areas. It's always interesting for me to reflect on the fact that King County is actually geographically mostly a rural county. And so we have to make sure that whatever method we're employing is something that would work well in that area as well. It also has a really well-established method that is used with reputable scientific organizations, including WHO and CDC. So this is a method that has some good research behind its use. Oops. Okay. Overview of 2024. Just want to assure folks that planning is very well underway at this point. We have been working on planning towards the use of this method since June of this year, when we first started engaging HUD about another methods exception. Again, I believe I mentioned this, but we did get that methods exception fully approved. So we are full thumbs up from HUD in the use of this. We'll be using respondent-driven sampling. I cannot emphasize this enough, but we are not doing the qualitative data collection that we did in 2022. We are really focused on utilizing this for the enumeration necessary for the point in time count itself. There's a number of lessons we learned in 2022 that we are trying to implement changes because of here. I'll go through some of those, though not a fully exhaustive list later today. And then we're working in deep partnership with the University of Washington here. I know last time that we worked with the University of Washington, Christopher, was that a hand? Okay, perfect. for some reason, you're the only person that pops up too on my view. So not sure why. When we worked with the University of Washington last time, folks had some questions about what that partnership was. And so I just want to be really clear what we're getting in that partnership and the kind of oversight and review that's going through this work, working with them. We're going to sign a very strict data sharing agreement. Lawyers are talking to lawyers right now about exactly what that will look like to ensure that all client level data is hosted on RHA secure servers. And that for any data that is migrated off of an RHA server for analysis gets deleted, and we have verification of that deletion after the fact. One of the great benefits of working with a research institution is we have access to their institutional review board, or IRB, and we will be putting this methodology through the IRB. That's what that says is we get a stamp of approval that we are ethically doing research with humans. Very important step to complete there. And then we are working actually on eventually publishing this so that other people can have validity in knowing that this is a method that works and that is a method that others could use in their COCs or other areas. And so this will go through peer review of results. That is really the gold standard of getting review of both methodology and results. And I believe will help to solidify people's trust that what we get on the other side of this is accurate. Okay, respondent-driven sampling. So RDS, just want to let folks know, it's both a sampling strategy and a set of statistical estimators. Sampling strategy, people often refer to RDS also as like snowball method, peer recruitment method, things like that. That is how we contact people or how we get people included in our sample. And then the statistical estimator is what is the math behind how we turn that information into the overall estimate of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness. A great thing about this is we're able to go from really small sample population to a pretty accurate full population estimate. And as I mentioned previously, the peer-to-peer recruitment really allows us to measure hard to reach populations, people experiencing unsheltered homelessness being a hard to reach population. This has two parts that'll go into the method with which we go through data collection or sampling, and then the data analysis or the statistical estimation. Data collection. So right now our plan is to staff hubs across the county from January 22nd to February 2nd, Monday through Friday of both of those weeks. And most surveys will be completed there. I will give one caveat with this is that, as we know, and as was mentioned previously, our part of the state can have severe weather during that period. If we do have a severe weather during that period, we have already secured approval from HUD to shift this back, as we know that that is not the thing that we need to activate our community on at that time, and also could decrease our ability to get people's participation. So we're moving forward with these as being our dates, but we'll be flexible if need be on that component. Most surveys are going to be completed at those hubs, so people come to those hubs in order to receive that survey. But we start seeds doing street outreach on January 22nd, so that first day. Members of my team are working really diligently with partnering with providers and other folks to identify how we might best do that seeding to make sure that we include a broad amount of subpopulations that we're really making sure that we need to incorporate in this. An example of that is I'm talking with Chief Seattle Club about what it might look like for their outreach team to help do direct seeding for folks that they know are experiencing unsheltered homelessness and are Indigenous, to make sure that we have that fully represented in our count. We're also doing some work with our youth providers to make sure that we're doing seeding appropriately there as well. We provide the first respondent with 3 coupons. These still unclear why somebody way back when decided they're called coupons, but these coupons have information about where to go in order to participate, the kind of incentives that folks would get if they do participate. That respondent gives those to people who they know, also known as Wave 1. Those people come back to a hub with a coupon to be surveyed, and then this begins again. This is a slightly more visual representation of what that looks like. So first interview is happening in the field again. So surveyors partnering with our outreach team, identify a seed participant, complete that survey in the field. One of the key improvements that we've made this year that I'll talk about later is the use of tablets for our data collection rather than pen and paper. It's useful for a number of reasons, not least of which the fact that it helps to maintain security and privacy of that information, so that we don't have to immediately put a paper file into a lockbox in the field. We give coupons to those participants. We ask them to distribute those coupons, and then we provide compensation. Our current plan is to provide people with a gift card of $20 to $25. That amount has not yet been determined. But when we give that person that Visa gift card, there's another part to the compensation that happens after that, which is that seed participant goes and gives those coupons to 3 people that they know. Those coupons have a unique code that ties each of these participants back to that person, so that when that person comes in and participates in a survey, the person who recruited them receives an additional $5 per person that's recruited. So this is another learning we got from our University of Washington partners, is that this allowed for deeper penetration into networks when they tried this in 2023. And so people, again, are getting multiple rounds of compensation. So not just their participation, but recruitment as well. At the wave 1, person comes to the hub, they complete a survey again on tablet with a surveyor. They get coupons, that participant is asked to distribute them. We provide that stage 1 of compensation, and then the seed person receives that stage 2 of compensation. And then it repeats. Wave 1 goes out, talks to people in their network, tries to recruit them in. Those folks come and do an interview with a surveyor, and the process continues. Eventually, we have data that allows us to represent a social network. This is one version of that. We can see that each dot or a node is a person, and then those lines in between show relationships. This shows how you can move from just one seed to a massive amount of people engaged in this work. We saw this when we were doing this in 2022, and based off of what, again, we heard from our partners at the University of Washington for 2023, that additional compensation method helped get more folks to wave 8. This is where things get a little mathy, and I apologize. And Christopher, thank you for your recommendation of working with the comms department on this. I have, and it is still a little mathy. So I'm going to show some equations. I'm going to try to break those down as much as possible. I just want to be as transparent with folks as possible on here about what actually is going into this, and happy to answer questions about it. Also happy to skip around and provide separate briefings on just the math for the people who are deeply interested in the math, but till I hear otherwise, let's kind of go through. These are different ways of looking at social networks. This is what I'm more used to when looking at social networks, so that we're looking not just in a relationship pattern that is from one person to another in a really linear way. We know that that's not how relationships work. People and networks are interrelated. And so this math or this visualization is really what the best experts have come up with in terms of how to visualize that, even though it's a little chaotic. But what you can see here is by that color coding, how one individual gets to more individuals throughout this network. A little bit of vocabulary that's going to be necessary for understanding this math is something called degree. So degree, or little d, is the number of people experiencing homelessness that an individual knows. So that is a representation, or literally a count, of the number of people you're connected to in this visualization. But we also ask people in the questionnaire that we have, we ask some network-based questions. Those network-based questions help us understand how many people they know sleeping in different environments. So we're getting both exactly the number of people that they are connected with through who they recruit, but we also are getting reports of their larger network as well. There's been some really interesting validation research done to show that people are actually very accurate at representing their networks, which makes this much, much better. This is the math part. I'll explain what this means, but there is some math that I won't be able to break down completely, and that's because this is, just to be transparent, some pretty complex math. The folks who do this work that we're partnering with have been working in this area in statistics and population level statistics for years. I will do my best to try to break this down a little bit more. But we use something called the Selganic hackathorn estimator. Somebody asked me the other day if I was just making up words. Promise I am not. But this is an estimator that helps us to get to an understanding of the proportion of the number of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness to the total number of people experiencing homelessness. I'll walk through what each of these different parts of the equation mean, though, so that it becomes a little more accessible. Okay, so NU, this is the total number of people unsheltered. So this is the target of what we're trying to understand, how many people are experiencing unsheltered homelessness. That is a subset of M, which is the total population of people experiencing homelessness. And what is not represented here is NS, which is the total number of people experiencing sheltered homelessness. We do use that in this estimation. It's the fact that we have both our work outside and our work inside that allows us to get to that full number. This is where the symbols get even more fun. So the little line over the D means average. So what this is looking at is the average degree of people in shelters that night. So degree, again, is how many people are connected to other people and getting an average amount across an entire network. DU is looking at this, but for the unsheltered population. We have CSU. So this is looking for the number of cross-social ties between sheltered and unsheltered. What that means is it's the number of people who are sheltered, who have social ties or connections with people who are unsheltered. So it's a way that we are looking at enumerating that. And then CUS is just the reverse of that. How many people who are unsheltered, no people who are sheltered. Again, when we're doing this unsheltered work, we are asking people who they know who are experiencing homelessness across many different locations. That includes shelters. So we don't incorporate that in the unsheltered count, of course, but it's useful information to be able to create these estimators. Now we're getting a little Greek. Mu is just the proportion of people who are unsheltered. So I won't take you through all of the algebra steps here, but essentially when we break down that equation, use it both for, or use it for the unsheltered population, and then we know NS, which is the count of sheltered, we're able to get to this equation. This equation gives us a really solid understanding of how many people are experiencing unsheltered homelessness in that system. Thank you for bearing with me about this, but basically this thing to take away from here is that what this estimator allows us to do is say that if we know the number of people sheltered and the proportion of the total homelessness population that is unsheltered, we can estimate the total number of people living unsheltered. The key part of what we're looking at here is the total homeless population or the proportion of the total homeless population that is unsheltered. That is the piece that Selganic hackathorn estimator helps us get to. And so by putting together a couple pieces of information, mind you, very advanced statistics, we're able to get to a solid understanding of the total number of people living unsheltered in King County. A little bit more math on this. One of the really excellent things about this type of work and this type of analysis is that we're actually doing this estimation many times. So our researcher friends are going to run those estimates again and again, looking at different cuts of the network. This is where this has actually a lot of power, is because if you remove the seed and the first wave, which are subject to bias of how an individual is recruiting somebody, so how we're planting those seeds, you can remove those from the network. You still see all the other social ties, and you're able to run this again. You're able to run it on subparts of the network. And then the key part here is we're also able to run that with demographic information, including race, ethnicity, gender, veteran status, disability status, all the other things that we are asking for that HUD information. We're able to run this in different cuts in order to allow us to see what those populations are within the overall population. As with all statistical analysis, what we're looking for is convergence on something that we're confident in. The curve to the right kind of shows what that looks like. But what we get to is an estimate that we have 95% confidence in. So saying, like, in a sampling method, we're saying we're pretty confident that it is right within this range. That is what we get out of this, that helps us to better understand what is that total population with some upper and lower bounds. One of the things that we did hear from folks in 2022 who were like, hey, this is a sampling methodology. We expect to see some upper and lower bounds. And we did not publish those. We will be working on being more transparent about that this year and release those. I'm really excited about this. I get really nerdy about this kind of stuff. 95% confidence interval, again, is also one of the higher level of confidence that you're looking for in order to say statistically and scientifically that the result you're getting is accurate. Okay, I just talked about a lot of RDS methodology and math. I'm going to go next into some lessons learned here, but want to pause to see just in terms of the math or the recruitment methods, if any board members have questions about those two parts of this. Board member Moritz.
Ben, if you're speaking, you're on mute right now, just FYI.
Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry. Sim, actually a question directed to you. I have some kind of higher level things I'd like to bring up about the PIT count. Would you like to do that now, or do you want to continue with the more technical discussion here?
Owen, what are your thoughts? Would you like to?
I would suggest if it's not related to the actual method that we wait for a moment. I have additional pieces that may help to answer some of those questions or provide more context before we get to those larger questions.
Ben, is that okay with you? And we'll make sure that we have time at the end. Okay. Owen, I did have one question for you. That CSU and the CUS, like in terms of sort of the connections and convergence between the two, like how much overlap is there actually between the networks of people experiencing homelessness who are sheltered versus unsheltered?
That is something that I don't know or have the actual figure on the top of my head there. I can do a little bit of investigation if Austin, you might remind me to do this after talking with our partners who actually ran the calculations previously. Sweet. Okay, moving on. We learned a lot in 2022, got some immediate feedback, including some members of this board. Thank you, Jaja. Finding that some of the hub locations that we were at in 2022 really needed to change and be improved. We are working on identifying locations, particularly in South King County, that are more representative of the overall homelessness population there. And then we're also working on adding an additional rural hub. Thank you, Marvin, for that recommendation as well. Working on citing one that is accessible for folks living unsheltered in rural parts of our community. We think with a couple of those improvements and other improvements about hub locations that we can get greater confidence from folks in making sure, or in the fact that we are actually engaging with a large number of folks that are representative across the community. I do want to remind people with this that we don't need to be in every location or represented in every city in order to actually get a representative sample for this. But we do want to make sure that we are sampling in locations that are representative and also locations that help to provide some confidence here. Because I don't want just to do good science. I want people to fully trust the work that we are doing. So there is a level of public confidence that I'm shooting for there.
I see Ben's hand up. I don't know if that's a question for now or from prior.
Sorry, it was before.
Oh, my apologies.
Thank you. We also knew that staffing demands were greater than we had anticipated. This is a very new method that I think many of you remember. We came together pretty rapidly in 2022. But now that we have some experience using this method and have some time to properly plan, we'll have more robust staffing plans with clearer delineation of roles. A lot of this is coming from direct input from folks who supported this previously that we captured in 2022, some work from our partners at the University of Washington who tried this out again in 2023. And I'm very, very excited to not go through the same kind of chaos as we did in 2022. I mentioned this previously, we're going to better leverage technology rather than using paper forms. One of the things that folks who participated in this in 2022 will remember is you had to like manually identify a code for somebody based off of a code that came in and write it all on paper on a new coupon every time they came through. It worked, but oh my gosh, was that confusing and chaotic. I apologize to people that I subjected to that, but we're going to actually have some on-site printers for printing off QR codes that will help to do that. A thing that's really exciting about that is we can do some data validation as it's coming in, because we'll be able to digitally collect this information rather than having to take paper forms that we then take to a central location and do post data collection, data entry. So it should streamline the process quite a bit, as well as making it more secure. We also know that there was not enough training for interviewers in 2022. Still extraordinarily impressed by folks that we had deployed in the field doing this work with a minimal amount of training. But we're going to work on upping that for 2022 or for 2024, looking both at an increase in quantity and quality of training. And there's going to be in contact with folks who helped staff hubs to figure out what gaps we had in training that we might be able to address. We'll get into that in a moment, but we will be moving towards some of that planning shortly. Some additional lessons learned. One of the biggest issues that came up with talking with some of our Native providers is that our American Indian Alaska Native community was underrepresented. This, in getting into some deep conversation with some folks at Chief Seattle Club, is not necessarily about how we did recruitment, but how we asked people to identify their race. So it's how we asked that question. And so I'm in collaboration with folks from Chief Seattle Club who are being very generous to me with their time in order to give some advice on how we might ask that question better, that is also in alignment with our requirements from HUD. We also know that families with children were underrepresented. We are looking at an additional innovation this time, looking at piloting a phone-based hub for families with children. And we will be partnering with Mary's Place's intake line in order to do that. Really excited about this. Janelle and I toured with some folks from Mary's Place, including oh my gosh, committee member Tillman from Mary's Place for the advisory committee last week, and I'm really excited about this partnership. We're doing this really just specifically for families. This has come up a couple times of why don't you do this for more populations? This is the first time that we're doing a phone-based one, and based off of what we learned in 2022 about biting off more than we need to at any given moment, we're really going to focus on doing this just for one population and doing it well, and centering on a population that particularly has difficulty to get to a physical hub during the day. Another component that we're looking at with this that allows us for that differentiation is we are planning on providing heightened incentives for families with children. So looking at providing greater, or not greater quantity, gift cards that are closer to $40 or $50 rather than 20 or 25, knowing that families have greater needs that they need to meet. We also dramatically undercommunicated about the new methodology last year, which is why you are being subjected to too much math from me today, and will probably continue to be. And so we're trying to get out in front of people early, include more detail, again, help to build the public confidence in this work. That will also include more reporting that comes out on the other side of it, so that people can see what did we learn from this, and have a better understanding of what we know about our unsheltered community on the other side of this. We also, and I don't know if I could ever say this enough, but we found out that pairing the point in time count and qualitative data collection was difficult just from a logistical standpoint. That level of qualitative data collection in that short of a period of time, regardless of the recruitment methodology, would be very difficult. And so what we're working on doing is just focusing on the point in time count this year and only gathering that data to do this extremely well. We'll say that those are just 8 lessons learned from this. We have many more lessons learned, but those are ones that I really wanted to highlight for you all in the public today. Timeline. So we're in November. We are working on finalizing our hub locations right now, finalizing that methodology and staffing plan. When I say finalizing methodology, want to be clear, it's about the implementation of the methodology, not making changes to how we're doing it in general. And then we will, of course, submit that final methodology to our advisory board. Again, as that COC oversight board, we want to make sure that we keep them keenly aware. We'll submit that to you all as well. And then we'll be in volunteer recruitment. So very soon we'll be looking at how can we get people committed to working in these hubs. We really want to focus on folks who know the communities that we're physically going to be in, because we know that relationships matter. So people who are in those communities know the people experiencing homelessness there, whether they have previously experienced homelessness themselves, are a provider or a community member that deeply engages. We'll have a mix of folks at hubs from that recruitment that I talked about from King County's Regional Homelessness Authority, and then some researchers from the University of Washington, so that we can have a good mix of folks working together. December is going to be continuing on those efforts, working on logistics, supplies, and trainings, and doing a lot of the back end pieces that you won't see a whole lot of, but I will do my best to keep you informed during that time. And then January is really our month to shine. We'll get all of our logistics and supplies finalized. We want to complete all volunteer training by the 12th, so that when we are ready to go on January 22nd in the field, we're ready to go. 2 weeks of data collection there. Again, if we do have a severe weather event, we will look at moving that back some, and are working on with our severe weather team here about what that would look like and what indicators would tell us to move back. And then after data collection ends on the 22nd, we're going to take a short break to catch our breath before moving immediately into data validation and analysis. Again, because we do those many different cuts of the data in order to make sure that we're doing it by all the different demographic information and getting towards removing bias where we're able to in the sample, it's going to take a minute to actually get to a final data analysis, hoping that to complete that on March 15th, which gives us a month and a half before we anticipate submitting to HUD. I don't believe that they have identified when they need the final submission yet, but it's usually around the end of April. Hub considerations. One thing I know people are really excited about and really want to know is where might we go? Apologies to our advisory committee last time it went. I know that Alex sent out a correction, but I shared the wrong hubs in our meeting. The hubs that I'm going to share today help to correct for some of the comments that you all were actually giving to me. So we'll share those in a moment. But when we're identifying hubs, we're doing engagement with folks across King County in order to identify where to go. Vehicle residency working group. So thank you, Bill Curtin Hackett, who I voiced his concern earlier, trying to work with you all in order to make sure that we not only have locations that are accessible for vehicle residents, but that we're doing seating into folks who are living in vehicles. We're working with Seattle King County Coalition on Homelessness, or SCITCH, who has done this count for many years in the past, and learning a lot from them. As I mentioned previously, we're working with Chief Seattle Club. Our sub-regional planning team, always excellent at helping to make sure that we're talking with folks across the county, not just being Seattle specific. I believe next week we're talking with Volt, or the Veteran Operation Leadership Team. I mentioned a collaboration with Mary's Place earlier, and then members of my team have been meeting with a number of different youth providers in order to get input on this. Hub considerations. We basically want to assure people that we're really looking for some specific things in order to identify a hub that will work. Again, we're looking for a total of probably 10, maximum 12, but we'll remind folks that 10 is sufficient in order to get across the whole region. And we're looking for places that we think that respondents can get to and are accessible, not just to overall people, but also for different subpopulations we're working with. And we're looking for places that folks can come inside. We know January is a little cold, has accessible bathrooms, and key to some of this is also have internet or good hotspot reception. Okay, now for the mappy part of this. This is a representation of where the RHA completed this in 2022, which are the little red diamonds. And then 2023, when our University of Washington partners were working on this method, where they went to. So we got to learn a lot from not only the locations we chose, but also the locations that they chose as well. Through those 2 years is how we got to that list before of what an ideal hub looks like. You'll notice here that there are some areas that don't get covered. And so we are looking, while I don't have a map, we are looking at helping to spread out our hubs just a little bit more in order to have a larger geographic coverage. So again, to give people more trust that we're hitting all the different parts of the counties. Right now, these are the hubs in consideration. This is not the final list. We're working with folks to help narrow these down, but are in conversations with folks at different locations about what it might look like in order to use that as a hub. I won't go through all of these now, but I will highlight just a couple pieces. One is the Southeast King County component. We heard loud and clear from folks that we did not have representation there previously. So we're working with Maple Valley Food Bank in order to get into that area. We also heard again in South King County that we likely were not in the correct locations there. Came loud and clear from folks. Day one, I think Jaja said, why aren't we in Federal Way or Kent? So we are looking at getting into Federal Way in Kent. And looking at Arcadia as well to ensure that we have not just seating for youth, but a very accessible location for youth to go to. And then next steps for this, we're working on finalizing hubs. My team is meeting with people pretty much every day this week and into next week in order to finalize those hubs. As soon as that is finished, we can really get to the detailed implementation and the methodology and staffing plan. One thing I will lift up here is that HUD is actually encouraging us to look at shortening the amount of time we're at hubs. And we do have evidence that we can actually collect enough information in as little as 3 days in some areas. And so we may be looking at some of the hubs being open for a shorter period of time rather than those full 10 days. And so we'll get into the details of what that will look like. We'll create those specialized staffing plans, continue community engagement, answering folks' questions about this. And then, of course, going to recruiting for hub staffing. This is where we'll start reaching out to folks in order to figure out who we can get to be in those locations for 10 days. And then all the less exciting back-end logistics like printers. With that, I'm happy to open it up for questions from the board.